Allen's Investigate, airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans. Yay, and welcome to the Allen's Investigate with me, Shona Allen.
And I'm Gary Allen, the Cockney Bard.
We're broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network 105.3 and 107.7 FM from New Orleans and also on Roku. Now, this week, we'd like to welcome a very special guest, Graham Phillips, best-selling author, historical detective, modern-day adventurer and real-life Indiana Jones. In the 1980s, after working as a radio journalist and broadcaster for the BBC and editing a popular monthly magazine, Graham turned his talents to investigating unsolved historical mysteries. He has since written 16 books that are in print around the world and have been published in many different languages. Well, really pleased to meet you, Graham, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on.
No,
yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's
brilliant. We thought we'd kick off basically, if you don't mind, with sort of asking a little bit about yourself, if you could sort of tell the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, I began it all about 40 years ago. As you mentioned then, I was a magazine editor, and the magazine was all about the paranormal. And that kind of got me interested. I was a journalist before that. Normal journalist, nothing to do with the paranormal, but that got me interested. And one thing that the magazine that we ran back then was an old, the offices were in an old Victorian house in the middle of a town called Wolverhampton in the centre of England.
All right, okay.
And we were basically doing a lot of experiments with, I don't know, seances and mediums and all sorts of things. And we seem to have attracted all sorts of weird activity in the house itself. There's a much bigger story to it than this, but this is very simply what happened. We started to get weird happenings. I mean, it began with, the first thing that happened is one night, just as it was getting dark, the whole place filled with this weird incense smelling smoke. And we thought there must be something on fire, you know. So we checked all the cupboards, all the wiring.
Left the toast burning, yeah.
There was absolutely nothing. People didn't have fancy smoke detectors back then, but we couldn't find any reason for it. And it dissipated after about 5 minutes. It happened again the next night and the next night, and no one could explain it. We had the electric company around, we had the fire brigade. No one could explain why this was happening every night just as it got dark. And eventually we got the BBC TV, brought a crew there. They filmed it and no one could explain what was going on. It became quite a well-known case of weird poltergeist, if you like. But that was
can I just tell the Graham, sorry to interrupt you. Can I just tell the people it's called Strange Phenomena, the magazine?
That is correct.
Yeah, well, you've done it with Andrew Collins, just to let them know.
Oh, right, yeah. The magazine was called Strange Phenomena.
Yeah.
It was written with Andrew Collins, who's probably been on your show.
Not yet.
No, we're going to get him out.
You know, he writes books similar to the ones I do. Historical mystery.
Twist his arm.
And but after this happened, we then started getting bumps and knocks and weird things going on. Electrical appliances started fusing out, lights blew. Eventually, the electricity in the house failed altogether. The electric company said, there's got to be something wrong with the wiring, although we can't tell you what it is, and cut us off. So we could no longer use that as the offices. We had to move somewhere else. We still had 6 months lease on this place. And while I was fighting to get money back from the landlords, because, you know, how can we be expected to keep paying for this when we can't even have electricity? And they, you know,
which is unexplainable as well, yeah.
And it was unexplainable. But anyway, so we thought, well, this is quite good because we've sort of got a paranormal case on our own doorstep, quite literally, in our own doorstep.
Yeah.
And so we started, groups of us would stay there at night and see if we could record anything happening, and it did. There was strange bangs and crashes, singing noises coming from like nowhere, whispering voices. People saw a Victorian figure in a top hat and a long coat, or as they described as a Victorian figure. But it wasn't just ghosts from the past people were seeing. They were seeing like characters in contemporary attire. And one person actually said they saw a man walk past outside with a dog, and then an hour later, a real man walked past outside with a dog.
So you were seeing the future, in other words, weren't you?
It was just a really weird. But anyway, I won't carry on with that. I mean, the final thing is when Andrew Collins, who you mentioned, almost burnt to death in there. We decided to stay over one night, and the only light we had was from candles, and we were sleeping on sleeping bags on the floor, and the candles were like miles away, many feet away from us. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night to see Andy Collins frantically trying to beat out flames that were leaping from his sleeping bag.
Oh, no.
One of these candles has somehow jumped across onto him. And anyway, got out and miraculously he wasn't burned. And I remember somebody once said to him, he was interviewed, it was all over the news, he was front page of the local paper holding his burned up sleeping bag. How did he survive this? And somebody said to him, well, when you woke up and you saw these flames, what did you think? He said, I thought I was dreaming and went back to sleep.
Oh my goodness me.
But he got away with it.
Yeah.
So anyway, that got me interested in paranormal stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I think probably what happened is you kind of opened the door, didn't you? If you were sort of doing seances and things like that. Because it's like you kind of knocking on the door and they're going, yeah, okay, hi.
It must have been thingy as well for a BBC journalist who wasn't really into that, and then suddenly discovering all these things. I mean, we know what you're saying about seeing the apparitions, because we have done that ourselves when we was in America and that. So we do know that's true, and it does happen. Yeah.
Well, you had an interesting experience. You were telling me about with was it a banjo or something? You were with a few friends.
Yeah.
And the plectrum actually lifted up off
up
the floor.
about 6 foot from the banjo and came back down on the strings. Yeah, it was amazing to see that.
Strummed on the strings, which is quite amazing.
Wow, and you actually just watched it?
We watched it. Yeah, we watched it. But when we was in America, we were doing paranormal investigation with New York forensics detective and Arnold Schwarzenegger's bike rider, and so they were not fools, them two, and we were doing it. But we did see manifestations of characters, didn't we? Just appeared from nowhere, walked across the town, Calico Ghost Town. That is, walked across Calico Ghost Town, completely disappeared. Yeah,
wow,
amazing to see that.
So it's incredible when you see these things and you have these experiences, because I'm sure, there's probably a lot of people out there probably listening thinking, oh, what a load of rubbish, whatever. But I tell you, unless you see these things for yourself and experience them, it is quite hard to believe. So you have to.
Well, I mean, over the years, I've sort of seen and witnessed like really weird stuff. I mean, shortly after, well, actually at the same time as these weird things are happening, and maybe partly caused it, we started to investigate, which wasn't originally anything paranormal. It was an historical mystery, because the magazine basically did also just investigate mysteries, not just the paranormal.
Yeah.
And one of the things we investigated was there was a legend that the Queen, Mary, Queen of Scots in the 1500s, like Shakespeare's time, she had this ring, silver ring, in which was set a green stone. And it was supposed to have some kind of miraculous powers, according to legend. When she died, when she was executed by the English Queen, Elizabeth, in the 1580s, this ring disappeared. And it kind of became a sort of a relic that people were searching for, those people who wanted her to become Queen of England after Elizabeth, and she became a martyr to them. They kind of looked at this as a kind of relic, if you like. And some people thought it had magical powers, mystical powers.
Yeah.
But what was fascinating, we found that In not far from Wolverhampton, in the centre of England, was a place called Harvington Hall. It was an old Elizabethan rambling building, manor. And in around 1600, there was a man there by the name of Humphrey Packington, owned it. He'd been a close associate of Mary Queen of Scots.
Mm-hmm.
And the legend was that he had had this and he'd hidden it, and he'd left a series of clues as to where it was, somewhere in the building. Well, no one had ever found these, but the reason we went there is because not long before we began this investigation, they had been renovating the place, and behind the plasterwork of an upstairs corridor, they found all these paintings that had been sealed up behind the plasterwork. And experts said they'd been there since around 1600. This guy Humphrey Packington must have had them put there, but nobody knows what they mean. And we thought, wow, this could be these clues that are spoken about in the legend. So we went there, and basically the center picture of all these showed a youthful King Arthur wielding Excalibur. And behind him, there's a hill with all his knights gathered on it.
Mm-hmm.
And cutting a long story short, we thought, if this is a clue, maybe it refers to somewhere nearby. And very close to this Harvington Hall, there was a hill called Knight's Hill, Knights of the Round Table. And right below it, a bridge called Arthur's Bridge that did date from the 1500s. So it would have been there.
Yeah.
Myself and Andrew Collins went there when we first kind of figured this out. We thought, we've got to go there. And it was nighttime when we arrived. And there was this lake, a small stream connecting to a second lake over which this Arthur's small stone footbridge went. And behind that was the Knight's Hill. We finally figured out that if the figure in the painting, the Arthur figure, he's kind of like looking down and to his left. And if you stood on the bridge with the hill behind you and to your left, in the same way as Arthur is standing in the picture with the Knight's Hill there, then if you look down, you'd be looking down into the foundation stones of the bridge. The paintings were called the Nine Worthies because there were 9 other figures around Arthur.
Yeah.
Andy Collins figured out that 9 must be a number. So eventually we chose 9 stones along, 9 down. We managed, it was all overgrown and brambles and everything, but we eventually managed to remove this stone, and behind it was a short sword about this long, with the coat of arms of Mary Queen of Scots on it. It had to be completely cleaned up because it was all covered in silt and sediment of years. And it turned out that this had been hidden there for like 400 years or whatever, for 1600 years, almost, well over 350 years.
Yeah,
that's incredible, isn't it?
But the thing was, what then started to happen, it wasn't just that we'd solved these clues. Incidentally, this sword eventually led us to find this green stone, but that's another story. But what was fascinating is that while we were looking for this sword, 2 or 3 other people who were kind of vaguely involved with the magazine, but knew nothing about what Andy and I were doing at all. Only the 2 of us knew at this point. One guy had a dream that we'd found a sword. Another lady had a dream that we were standing by a bridge in water, and there was a strange smell there, and there was, because there was all this rotting vegetation. Somebody else dreamt about us standing beneath a holly bush. There was a holly bush on top of this bridge right above us. I mean, all these things somehow people seem to be picking them up telepathically.
Yeah,
so this was a kind of ordinary historical quest that turned into a kind of mystical psychic quest, which actually started the term psychic questing for various investigations Andrew and I did over the years, where we searched for historical items or searched to solve historical mysteries, and kind of psychic things happen to help us along, hence the word psychic questing.
It's amazing. It's kind of reminding me in a way of the Gate of Remembrance. Have you heard of that with Bly Bond, Frederick Bly Bond?
I've heard of him.
Yeah, he was the guy, along with his colleague, that basically started doing automatic writing, and they started channeling a monk from Glastonbury Abbey. And it was through these channelings of drawings and answers to questions and diagrams and things like that, they were told where to dig at Glastonbury Abbey to find the Edgar Chapel. And it was indeed exactly where they were told it was.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was.
I don't know quite what he did.
Oh, yeah, that was something we got onto from Michael Benteen, reading about Michael Benteen, because he was really fascinated by that story. Because all the priests, they tried to get rid of all the copies of the book, The Gate of Remembrance. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was, they tried to ban it, I think.
They did, yeah, they banned it. Yeah.
I think also in the bookshop there, I think they tried to ban it as well.
Are they still banned it?
It's really interesting because obviously, you know, in those days, and we'll come on to your book in a minute, your new book out, it's really interesting because people in those days were actually very much into spiritualism and sort of tuning in to see what they could find.
Tellies, isn't it? Yeah.
So I think that's very interesting.
When was Bligh-Bond alive then?
The book's from 1918, isn't it?
Yeah, from the early 1900s.
So he's like one of the first spiritualists doing the automatic writing.
Well, I think, yeah, he would have been. I think he would have been connected with a few people that were into that. Yeah, I mean, he obviously. I mean, the information he got was accurate. What they got for that, so and they did find it, and it's very much like what you guys were doing. So it's absolutely fascinating the intelligence you can get from being fed, or as nightly gold with intelligence, as Shakespeare puts it. Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? So you know, when I was sort of having a little look at your new book and your great book trailers and things like that, I was thinking, oh, it was ringing some bells with that.
Yeah,
so that was really interesting.
We think we can play your trailer if we're fortunate, Graham, because it's a wonderful trailer.
Oh, yeah.
If our lovely producer,
Laurelie,
if you wouldn't mind playing the trailer, if you can, with the wonders of technology. I'm not sure she can.
Well, she said she can, so hopefully she can. Laurelie, are you there?
She's probably gone to the loo. Anyway, we'll carry on chatting about it. So tell us a bit about it then, Graham, because I mean, from what I've seen, it looks absolutely enthralling.
Yeah.
Well, it's different to anything else. What happened? Oh, hold on. She's just said something.
I was
sharing I think it's not happening. I don't think so. Never mind.
Oh, well, never mind. I'll have to do a sort of mime.
You have to do a mime and a dance or something.
Yeah, it is wonderful. Yeah.
Well, okay. One of the things that we investigated about this green stone we were looking for back in 40 years ago is that it had belonged to a secret society eventually. I mean, Mary Queen of Scots is kind of part of all this thing, but that's just too complicated to go into. But simply put, it was a secret society founded by the Elizabethan astrologer and occultist Dr. John Dee.
We know a lot.
Yeah, we do. We know about Dr. John Dee. Yeah.
And he started this secret society. It seems to have kind of come to an end around about 1618. Some people know them as the Rosicrucians, but the inner group of this bunch of people were called the Order of Meoniah. Now, Meoniah is the name of an old kingdom as part of the kind of Greek Empire that was later known as Lydia. It's on the coast of Turkey, at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. It was a land where, according to some medieval occultists, it's where the Western occult tradition began. So they call themselves the Order of Meoniah after this place. Anyway, as far as we knew, it had packed up in 1518.
Can I just interject a minute as well, Graham? Because I believe that Meoniah is also an anagram of I am one, isn't it?
That's it. That's only revealed in the last page of the book. Oh. It doesn't matter.
Sorry.
I mean, they were big into anagrams in those days as well. I mean, we are as well.
It's an anagram for I am one. And it basically refers to the belief that even though they were communicating with all sorts of different spirits like angels and goddesses and gods and things, they believed they were all manifestations of one thing. and that
Yeah.
the mind kind of interpreted it. If you believed in Virgin Mary, you would see the Virgin Mary. If you believed in today's way of looking at it, if you believed in aliens, you would see an alien, you know. But whatever was truly behind it was one thing. So they tried to not give it a name like a god or a spirit or an angel or anything. And that is why they use the name Me and I. So it's got a double meaning. It is associated with this place, but it also means I am one. But it turns out that this in 1518 wasn't the end of the group, the Order of Me and I. It was restarted again by a group of Victorians in the 1850s. Now, they included quite a few famous people, a lot of pre-Raphaelite painters, including in the late 1800s, Jane Morris, the wife of William Morris, famous painter and model of the period.
Probably Rossetti, was it?
Rossetti, yeah. And all these are the people that were in it.
Yeah.
So they were kind of like a bunch of, I don't know, bohemian people that were very rich and had plenty of time to involve themselves in all these various interesting things, which included spiritualism, and that had just started at the time. Occult, there was various occult societies like the Madame Blavatsky's what was hers called, the Theosophical Society, and all this. It was a kind of the occult revival, basically. It was the time when books like Jekyll and Hyde were being written, and Dracula and things like this. People were really into all this gothic stuff. And this society started off at a place called Biddulph Grange, which was a Victorian mansion in the north central Midlands of England, in the moorlands of North Staffordshire.
Yeah, we go up there quite often. Yeah.
Have you been up there?
Yeah, we've got a friend who lives there. Yeah.
I've not been to Biddulph, no.
Not Biddulph, no.
But we'll
be looking at that.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we basically, what they did was, in the gardens, they built a whole series of shrines, I think you can best call them. There was what's known as the Chinese Sanctuary, which was a kind of Chinese pagoda building with gardens around it, a pool, and other kind of things that are usually found in Chinese shrines. They also built a Celtic glen, as they called it, where they got some stones from a nearby stone circle, which was being destroyed by a local preacher, saved them, re-erected them in the gardens.
Was that the Bride Stones?
That's the Bride Stones. And also they had a sacred spring that they created, like recreated a kind of holy well from Celtic times, say like 1500 years ago, was pretty much the end of the true Celtic period of history in England, anyway. And they recreated a sacred spring from this period. And also they built an Egyptian temple recreation. And under the house itself, they built a complete Roman temple, which is described as a catacomb because it just went from one place to another.
Amazing.
Now, if you go online and you say, you know, Biddulph Grange has got all these weird things in the gardens, they'll all say they're just there as ornamental buildings to complement the gardens that were grown there. And they're wonderful gardens. The owner of the property in the mid 1800s was a man called James Bateman. He was a horticulturalist, and he traveled the world collecting seeds, saplings, cuttings from plants from everywhere, had them shipped back to England, where gardeners laid out these amazing gardens that are still be seen today.
Fabulous, yeah.
They say, when you read it online, oh, James Bateman built this Egyptian thing because he had Egyptian plants there. He didn't have any Egyptian plants there. Name an Egyptian plant. It's a desert. In the Celtic glen, he's got Himalayan plants, so that wasn't there to supplement. You know, why didn't he build a Buddhist temple there or something, and so on? But the other thing is, he wasn't even in this country. He was charging around the world, or floating around, or whatever you do in a boat, floating around the world, getting all this stuff. While his wife, Maria, was the person who built all these temples. And she was the one who was head of this new Order of Me and I. And what's fascinating is that we started to investigate these places. Just take one, for example, the Egyptian temple. In the middle of it, there's a long corridor, like going into Tutankhamun's tomb, and then there's this central chamber, and in there there's this statue of this character called the Ape of Thoth.
Thoth, yeah.
His real name is Arni. He's not a god of ancient Egypt, but he's like a sort of demigod. He's like Loki in the Norse tradition. He's like the trickster of the gods, like the fool in Western tradition. And he's supposed to be outside of time and space. He can control fate. He can change the universe, according to what the ancient Egyptians believed.
That's
But
right.
He's also the god of nature, or the wild side of it. And the local guidebooks say he was put there to show the Bateman's love of nature. What?
Okay. Yeah.
So that's the kind of general idea of what the place is like.
But it's desperately needed that people do come out and begin to understand what the truth about it all is, because there's so much rubbish written, isn't there? You know, we really do need to get the truth out and to show people that there is more to life than they actually are aware of.
Well, the weird thing is, when we went there, my friend Jodie, who I wrote the book, this is now in the book Strange Fate that we're talking about now, which is what I've just had published. So we're right up to date now. This isn't taking place 40 years ago. This is taking place last year. My friend Jodie, my co-author, had a dream that she saw me in this Egyptian temple, and there was a Victorian lady standing there looking at me, turning and looking at me. And she said that in the dream she saw behind this wall there was another room like that had been bricked up. We then went there with various people who were experts on the building structure, who basically came to the conclusion there was definitely something that had been behind there but bricked up and then filled in, probably because it got dangerous. So she was right on that count. But also, while this was being filmed, I was being filmed, and on film, suddenly there comes out, and I've put this on my Facebook, and it's also, we'll put it on the website, I think. You can see this like grey shape of a woman in Victorian clothes turning to look at me, just as in Jodie's vision. It's there on film.
It's amazing. I watched it earlier, actually, and it's quite amazing.
Did you see it? Because some people say, I can't see it. There's nothing there. It's a bag of old sacks. But you could see it.
You can definitely see something. And also you could hear somebody talking as well, couldn't you? There was a lady's voice.
That's right. This one guy was knocking on the wall going, hello. And you can hear this voice going back, hello. And you're thinking, well, could it be something, there's strange acoustics in the place, somebody's outside and calling back, but we couldn't reproduce this same thing again. We couldn't figure out how it was happening.
Well, and didn't you get some knocking back as well, because you knocked and then it sounded like
there's this guy who was knocking there, one of the people who was one of these experts on ancient buildings, and he was saying, there's definitely a hollow there. And he was knocking, he'd go 1, 2, 3. And it sounds as though on the film, there's knocking coming back from the other side of where he is. When it may be somebody outside somewhere around the back who heard us because of the strange acoustics, and they're knocking back, but we couldn't figure that out. But the weird thing, this place, after we went there, I had been there before, many years before, but we went there, when I went there with Jodie, remember this trickster god, this Arni, this Ape of Thoth, is supposed to be able to change fate. We basically looked into how this Order of Me and what happened to this Order of Me and I, and it pretty much fizzled out in 1897 when there'd been a fire in the house. The legend is that a fire had started during a seance, but that may just be local story. And the place had burnt down. The whole centre of the place had burnt down. Pretty much after that, the Order of Me and I sort of fizzled out. But for years, I've written about this in the Green Stone book years ago, saying there seemed to be, that the Green Stone book is the book 40 years ago about the stuff I was talking about earlier. And I'd written in there about 1897 being the fire at Biddulph Grange when this new society, fizzled out. And loads of other people I know had investigated it in their books and everything, 1897. We went back to the house, and when earlier on we'd been looking at this particular picture, saying a photograph of the building as it was in 1897, right after the fire. We went back there, and we were talking to one of the guides, and Jodie had said something like, when the fire was in 1897, she said, no, it was 1896. I said, no, it's 1897. Have a look at this, you've got it here on your own picture on the wall. And it had changed to 1896. Everyone believed it was 1896. But in my writings and other people I know's writings and people who have done research, we've still got 1897. Wow. We investigated, we went to see another lady, an old lady who had been doing research into Biddulph for years. She was like an ex-university professor and was an expert on the history of the area. She almost had a fit when we told her that the fire was now in 1896. She says, no, it wasn't all my research, I'm telling you. She just sat there shaking when we told her. We proved to her from various other books that the fire had now changed to 1896 instead of 97. How does that happen? And even if somebody said, oh, you've jumped into another universe, well, how come my own books and other people's memories jumped with me?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think the interesting thing is with Graham with that is that I had an example of that, which was some sort of 20 years ago, and I was talking to a friend, and I said that you've lived many lives before, but in this life, you've died many violent deaths, but in this life you won't. And I looked at my friend Sheila, and I said, I can't say the same for you, Sheila. And when she went to bed, I kept saying, I keep getting fire with her. And 17 years later, she died in Grenfell Tower. So, yeah. So it just shows you that fate, I mean, that was obviously predestined 17 years before it even happened. So, yeah, I mean, that was quite a shock to me. But, that's what happened. So we know what you're saying. And,
absolutely.
And it doesn't matter if it's 30 years ago or 50 years ago. There is a fate. There's no question about that.
What was interesting, Graham, as well, that I noticed is the fact that they've obviously got a red glass pane that's producing a red light in the place where Thoth, the baboon god, is in the Egyptian temple. And I thought that was quite significant because obviously years ago when they used to do seances, they always used to use the red light, mainly because to the medium they said, it was safer and also it was easier to see manifestations. However, the military actually use red light, and the reason is because apparently it's easier to see in the dark with red light because it doesn't affect the eyes like normal light does.
Oh, I never thought about that being red light. It is red light, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know where it's coming from. I suppose there must be a red skylight thing or something.
Yeah, so
I never thought about that. They paint all
quite interesting. So, maybe from their point of view, when Maria actually sort of imagined these temples and they produced them, that the idea is perhaps that they used that place for a specific purpose. And the idea is that you, in red light, you're going to be able to see manifestations much clearer.
Well, the whole place, I mean, it seems that they were using these different shrines there for different reasons. I mean, I've just mentioned the Egyptian one. In the Chinese one, they've got a pool there. They used to float lanterns on it with sort of questions for the spirit world. It's what they do in China. They float these lanterns with like a little candle on a little boat thing, and it floats out. And then you're supposed to hear the answer when the wind blows through the weeping willows that hang over the water. And one time I tried this and put a little sort of light on a boat thing and put it into the part of the water, and somebody, I didn't hear it, but two people with me said they heard them. So what was it they said? They heard it say the words "by Christmas, by Christmas," and I said something like, "When will my car be fixed?" And it said "by Christmas." They didn't know what I was writing. You're supposed to see it. And it wasn't fixed by Christmas. But you'd say, well, I mean, it's bound to be, but it had been off the road for 2 years.
Wow.
So no, it is quite weird. But probably the strangest thing, or one of the strangest things about the whole of this strange fate story, is how it actually started for this Order of Meoniah. The old Order of Meoniah had gone long ago, and they were said to have had, and the Rosicrucians claimed to have found this tomb, which they resealed again afterwards in 1618-ish. And they opened it in 1604, sealed it in 1618, and it was supposed to contain all this occult paraphernalia, books, strange amulets and all this kind of stuff. And it just so happened that the woman who led it after John Dee's time was a woman called Mary Biddulph, who lived at Biddulph Manor, which was on the site of Biddulph Grange.
Interesting.
That's probably where the connection came in.
Yeah.
But there's more than that, because there was a little girl who, the two families mainly associated with Biddulph Grange are the Batemans, who I've mentioned, and the Heath family. Now, the Heath family eventually bought the place from the Batemans because the Batemans went broke, floating around the world, getting all this stuff and building these amazing gardens. The guy went broke, Bateman, and they moved out, and the Heaths took over. Now, the Heaths had a daughter, and they were very close friends of the Batemans. They lived right next door in another mansion. And they had a daughter, a 7-year-old daughter called Mary Ann. And one day there were the Bridestones, as I mentioned before, which was a stone circle, and next to it there was a old burial mound. Seemingly the best dating of it is probably about 1500 years old, which takes us to about the time of King Arthur. If you want to look at us, that's when Arthur is supposed to have lived 1500 years ago. It's when the Romans had left Britain and the British Celts were fighting the Anglo-Saxons that were trying to invade. Anyway, that gives you a historical context of when the tomb dates from. The stone circle was probably a lot older. Anyway, in this tomb, it was once covered by grass and rubble and things as a mound. And James Bateman had a cousin called Thomas, who was an archaeologist, who excavated this site in May of 1851. And what he did was to, before he was about to start to excavate it, Heath's daughter Mary, who was 7, and Bateman's son Robert, who was about 2 years older, were playing around the mound. Little Mary crawled in the mound and came out psychic. Apparently she went in and came out, "You must lie in the tomb of the Rosicrucians." What? That kind of thing. I'm not exactly sure. Nobody knows exactly what she said, but it was something along those lines. And of course, nobody believed her. So she took them to the ruins of an old priory that stood in the grounds of Biddulph Grange in Woodland there, and basically pointed and said, "Dig there." And they dug up and they found a kind of stone slab, and they found a crypt underneath the this old priory, which had all this kind of occulty paraphernalia in it. It also had a load of Knights Templars tombs in there, the Knights Templars from the Middle Ages, who were into the occult and all that kind of stuff. And these Templar graves still exist. They've been moved to a nearby church of St. Leonard's. You can see them all around the church now. The priory is no longer there. It's been turned into a barn as part of a farm. But she led them to this, and they said, "Wow!" So they restarted the Order of Meoniah because this little girl had led them to this thing. And apparently she was normal most of the time, but every so often she went off and did weird things. A few months later, about in the summer of that same year, she and her went with her parents to stay at the home of Lord Halifax. Now, he was like high up in the government of England. He owned a lot of properties. Robert Heath, Mary's father, he owned coal mines, and he was going there to see Lord Halifax up further up north than where he was, to his house to see if he could get mining rights there. So he stayed there for a few weeks, and with him were his wife. His wife is a can't remember her name now, Isabella, Anne, her wife Anne, and his daughter Mary.
Mm-hmm.
So they went to stay there, and while they were there, none other person, the person who was there at the same time was none other than Lewis Carroll, who invented the Alice in Wonderland stories.
Mm-hmm.
Alice in Wonderland, yeah.
And he was tutoring the children of Lord Halifax. Now, the thing was that it is very possible, in fact, almost certain, that Lewis Carroll based the idea of Alice on Mary Ann Heath.
Yeah.
Now, people say, oh, she was based on Alice Liddell, because Alice Liddell was the daughter of... The book wasn't published for many years later. At that time, he was at Oxford University as a lecturer. His boss had a daughter called Alice, and he dedicated the book to her and things like this. And basically people thought, well, he based Alice on her. Her name was Alice Liddell. He obviously named it after her to curry favor with his boss. But firstly, he'd come up with the story years before she was born, the original story back in 1851. Secondly, she looks nothing like the Alice in the pictures that he said she must be drawn like this, with the long blonde hair. She's got a bangs. She's got a bob. She's also about 12 years old. She's just, the whole thing doesn't fit with her being the original inspiration. Although he always said it was inspired by some little girl, and it began in 1851 with the first notes, and he did the first pictures that he asked later for the illustrator to copy pretty much exactly. And the thing is, Alice in the book says, in Alice in Wonderland, she says, I am exactly 7.5 years old. She says that at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. Mary Heath was exactly 7.5 years old when she met him.
That's a bit of a clue, isn't it, really?
The other thing is,
remove it, don't they, from history? You know,
the other thing is that what's really interesting is that somebody said, well, if he really did base it on her, wouldn't he leave some clues in the story? Yeah, when the White Rabbit first meets Alice, 4 times he calls her Mary Ann, and it's never explained why. Nobody called Mary Ann ever.
That's just a minor detail.
Another minor detail. So the thing is, okay, what in fact, think about it. Mary Heath, a little girl, crawls into a sort of hole, comes out, probably claiming to have all sorts of weird things happen to her. Alice follows a white rabbit into the rabbit hole where she goes to Wonderland. Also, he came up with both the story of Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass in tandem at that time. It seems that Alice, she climbs up onto a mantelpiece, goes through the mirror, and she's in another world, where weird stuff happens. It just so happens that there was a mirror in the place where the Mary Heath was staying, and Lewis Carroll was the tutor. There was a mirror that stood in the drawing room, which later ended up with one of the daughters of Lord Halifax in her house at a place called Horcross Hall in near Birmingham in central England. That mirror still survives. We've gone to see it. It's exactly the same as the paintings of the mirror in the book. Now, this is the weird thing.
That's just a minor detail.
He's fascinated by this mirror. Did she claim to get in it or something? And it inspired him to write this stuff. Well, when we first went to see this mirror, the house it's now in was a stately home. Now it's a spa resort and a hotel. We went there, and one of the receptionists was taking us round, and she said, we said, there's a mirror somewhere. She says, oh, yeah, you come to see the haunted mirror. Haunted mirror? She said, yeah, people say they see the ghost of a little girl in it with blonde hair. They say she looks like Alice in Wonderland. What? Nobody even knew this mirror had anything to do with the Alice in Wonderland story. And the thing is that one of the tales that we were told was once, so this is just an example, there was a barman working behind the bar in the long gallery just outside where this, what's basically a library, which is turned, it's a kind of a lounge area where you can have your drinks, but it's got books all around it, still as it was years ago, and it's got the mirror there above the fireplace. The barman cleaning up one night back midnight came into the one room into the library, and he sees reflected in the mirror a little girl, and he thinks, oh, she's up late, why is she out here? And he's not through the door yet, so he can't see her directly, and he thinks, oh, she's dressed up in fancy dress, because he described her as looking like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
So when he gets into the room, he can still see the mirror. She's disappeared. Now, there's another door down the other end that leads to the dining room. So he goes through there thinking she's run through into there, goes through into the other room, nobody there. He thinks, where's she gone? He comes back into the library. When he's going through that door, he looks back at the mirror where he was originally standing, where he saw her. She's then looking at him, going, laughing at him.
Really?
And he can't hear her, just sees her. So he runs in there, and she's gone again. He thinks she must have run out into the sort of the big gallery room outside. So he follows her out, and he can hear footsteps and laughter going into the distance. He can't find her anywhere. He didn't really think he'd seen a ghost until he finds out. He thinks, oh, it must be a little girl who's staying there overnight. But there was no children staying there that night. None could have been there at all. So
it's just incredible, isn't it?
So that's the kind of thing. So that's another story, isn't it? Off from this weirdness.
Should we try to play the trailer? Or?
Yeah, no, I was just going to quickly say, do you think it was basically acting like a scrying mirror, like John Dee's scrying mirror, for example?
Yeah, we managed to communicate with her in the end because Jodie had spent a lot of time in Asia, and in Japan, there is a tradition about using mirrors. They actually get ancestor spirits to occupy mirrors, believe it or not. This is what happens in these Shinto shrines. The priest can get a ancestor spirit into one of these special mirrors that's kept sort of out of sight of most people, but they're in all the shrines. And what's really weird is that it's completely unique to Japan, as far as I know. They can copy a spirit of, say I've got an ancestor, Uncle Joe, and I want to have it, and there he is. I want to go and see him in the mirror, or communicate with him, or whatever. Yeah, my cousins who live 100 miles away, they want him too. They can copy him like you'd copy a file on a computer, and then take the mirror to another one. So there's two copies of him. They tend to see. They actually believe that spirits that are captured in these mirrors aren't so much the ghosts of these people, but some kind of program that the Tibetan, in Buddhism, they're known as tulpas, which is a kind of psychic copy of yourself. That's why all these Japanese films have got all these ghost girls in mirrors, because girls are apparently pretty good at doing this. The whole story of the Bloody Mary Come to Me started in Japan with a girl called Haniko-san, who was supposed to be a schoolgirl who died in the 1950s. And she's supposed to haunt this big mirror in this locker room of this girls' school. And she sort of, if you say her name 3 times, she comes to you, but she doesn't kill you or anything. But loads of these guys, the idea of these kind of creepy ghost girls, like in The Ring, coming out of televisions, that's all basically based on this stuff.
Wow.
We thought, okay, let's try and call upon her in this mirror. And Jodie wouldn't do it. Well, she did do it. They said, no, I think you've got to do it. So I basically did what the Shinto people do. All I know is they clap their hands, bow 3 times, and say the person's name. So it's kind of like the Bloody Mary story. How Bloody Mary got tied up with it, I don't know. By the way, she's supposed to be an English queen, so how she got in the story. Anyway, so I went, Mary Ann, Mary Ann, Mary Ann. And then suddenly it was like, I kind of like the mirror moved, but my reflection in the mirror stayed where it was. And I kind of almost passed out for a minute, and into my mind, I kind of saw a vision, or not a vision really, but a kind of strong mental image of the little girl Mary walking down a path towards where she found this this crypt under this priory. That was how we found out about this priory in the first place. We didn't even know it was supposed to be there until we found it was now an old barn. And that came to me through a vision that I'd get it. I mean, maybe it had nothing to do with the mirror. Maybe it was just my own belief in it. But there's another.
Well, I would think if other people have seen things and had experiences, that would suggest that there is definitely something going on with it, then, wouldn't there?
Oh,
And
there's no doubt. I mean, I've spoken to the people who owned the property when it was still a stately home in the 1970s. And they used to see this girl. She's not really confined to the mirror. She floats around the building sometimes. I mean, there's directly above where the mirror is, there used to be this lady's bedroom. And one night she woke up and saw the ghost floating right over her. That would be creepy.
Yeah, it would.
Well, I'm wondering, Graham, if your story, John Dee was the head of the Rosicrucians and also linked to Francis Bacon and all the other characters. But what's interesting about that is that his son Arthur Dee, he came to Norwich and he links to the alchemist and Thomas Brown. So I'm wondering if there's any link between your story and those characters. It does sort of.
I mean, there's definitely a link with John Dee, and this was just weird. These kind of synchronicities that keep happening. Even when I talk about this thing, synchronicities happen.
Yeah.
Almost as what moment we're talking now, the BBC have got this show on all about Biddulph Grange for the first time ever.
How bizarre is that?
And this is the first time ever I've been on a radio show talking about this book. These bizarre synchronicities, I don't know how they work or what they are, but this is a weird synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence, if you want to call it that. Yeah. The sword we found that had once belonged to John Dee was found on the land of the Earl of Coventry. He was not at all happy with the fact we dug up his bridge. He basically demanded the sword. He wasn't going to let anybody have it. His estate manager kept it in a drawer somewhere in an office. They kept it. They wouldn't let anybody have it, and that was it. Every time we were trying to do, myself and Andrew Collins were trying to do filming about this in the past, with the BBC or whatever, they said, yes, you can come and film it here, but Phillips and Collins can't go anywhere near it. We don't like them, and so on. So it was there for years. I mean, right up until, a few years ago, it was always in the house, in the estate office of this property.
Do you know where it is now, Graham?
Say again?
Sorry, do you know where it is now?
Yeah, this is what I'm going to say about the really weird thing. It ended up in John Dee's house. So what happened was that one day and the Earl of Coventry had died in like 2004 or something. We'd found this in 1979. So it'd been with them for ages. It had stayed with the Earl of Coventry's son or whatever in, his, he kept it. Suddenly, just last year, when I was it the year before? Anyway, while we were doing this research, somebody just contacted me from the British National Trust, which are the government organisation which look after old buildings and buy them up when lords go broke, saying that they'd taken over Croom Court, which was the property upon which we found this sword.
Yeah. And
they said, the sword has been taken it's going to be on show at a local museum. We're putting it on show. Would you like to come along for the opening of this, thing? I said, yeah, sure. So I went along with Jodie, and we went along there perhaps a couple of days before they had the official opening of this. We turned up, and there it is in a cabinet on the wall, glass cabinet, the sword's there, and there's leaflets and pictures and all things about, how it was found, and pictures of me looking very young with big hair. and so we're looking at this, and I was saying, this is amazing. So this is quite incredible that this should be here, after so long about being out of sight. So it's in a place called Sevenstoke, which is a small town in the county of Worcestershire. No, it's not Sevenstoke. Sorry, the Sevenstoke's just next to it. It's Upton upon Severn, the River Severn, and it's a small town in Worcestershire, not far from the county town of Worcester. And it's in a museum called the Tudor House Museum, and it's there. And we were thinking, oh wow, this is amazing. So it's just been here. Where did you find it? And they said, oh, it's been here for years. What do you mean it's been here for years? Well, the Earl of Coventry gave it to us. He was fascinated by the story, loved you boys. What? He couldn't stand us. They all said, no.
It wasn't for double standards, there wouldn't be any.
No, that's right.
And he said, oh, he loved you boys. This has been in this museum since the 1990s. She said there was a flood once and we had to move it. And but you said you just put it on display. Yeah, this new display case, but it's been here there's no way. Loads of people I know that investigated this had seen the sword and knew the sword, and it's been filmed in the estate office of the Croom Court estate. It was never on display anywhere. So another universe split. When this weird stuff happened, half the people I know remember it being with the Earl of Coventry, the other half remember it being in this museum. And so then a man comes, when we first find this out, suddenly, this just sounds weird, but this man, the little old man in a black suit and sort of croaky voice, comes out of the darkness almost. He's obviously visited the museum. He's coming out behind some displays, and he says, oh yes, the sword, of course, it's very fitting it should be here. We said, what do you mean? Well, this was John Dee's house. John Dee was the man who made the sword, wasn't he? We thought, what? Well, I don't know if he made it. What do you mean this was his house? He said, check it out. So even the people who ran the museum didn't know that it turns out that for a short while, John Dee was a priest, and the church right opposite this building was where he was the priest of. And this was the place where the priest lived. John Dee lived in this house. And over the next few weeks, the people the museum staff kept finding all this stuff, that pictures of John Dee and letters from him and everything that were hidden around the house. Nobody even knew it belonged to John Dee until this old man told us.
That's incredible.
We ran after him and he disappeared. We couldn't find where he went.
Oh. Interesting, yeah. So have they put these items of John Dee's on display in this Tudor House Museum? Oh, brilliant!
Yes,
they
have.
Have a look then.
Yeah, they have. I mean, it's open to the public. You can see the sword. You can see these John Dee. There's like a painting of him with all this writing on the back, which looks cryptic to me because I couldn't work out what it was saying.
This is fantastic. Yeah.
It's really interesting because you mentioned Mary Queen of Scots earlier, but in Norfolk there's a place called Oxburgh Hall, and in there are some tapestries by Mary Queen of Scots, and I know there was a strong connection with swans, which kind of links into our story, but we'll have to talk about that another time. But it's very interesting because also there is a picture of Queen Elizabeth I, and there are a couple of pictures of Sir Francis Bacon, who of course was under the tutelage of Dr. John Dee and was very much involved in all this. And there's a portrait in there called Sir Francis Bacon, the Unknown Man.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So there's quite a strong connection with Norwich in all this, because the Bacon family actually did reside in Norfolk, and there is the remains of one of the halls of Nicholas Bacon in a place called Stiffkey in Norfolk. And it's a beautiful place, but unfortunately it's privately owned, so you can't visit it, only peep at it over the walls of the church. But so the Bacon's family actually had a really strong connection. Now there is a tomb in a church in Norwich dedicated to Sir Francis Bacon, although it's allegedly to a judge that resided at a similar time frame in Norwich. What it says on this plaque refers to the Sir Francis Bacon of St Albans. So there's a very
he was Lord of St Albans or something, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. We think that he's buried in because he had two wills, Francis Bacon. But this does link to your story. It's not just some way out thing. But he had two wills, and one of them he said he wanted to be buried obscurely.
My body can be buried obscurely.
And so in St Gregory's Church, there's a plaque on the wall that's written in Latin, and that is dedicated to Sir Francis Bacon, the philosopher. And there's a tomb there which is Sir Francis Bacon, but he is a judge. He was a Norfolk judge. So it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, there's strong connections, as we said as well. Arthur Dee, John Dee actually did visit Norwich once, I believe, and so did Queen Elizabeth I. But Arthur Dee, his son, who took on all the sort of alchemical learnings and manuscripts of his father, actually did reside in Norwich. And so this is really interesting. He was a neighbour to Thomas Brown.
Yeah.
He was also the physician and alchemist, and actually he bequeathed the alchemical manuscripts to Thomas Brown in the end. And Arthur Dee is actually buried in St George's Church in Norwich.
Wow.
Yeah. See, that's the interesting thing is it all ties in one way or the other. All the synchronistic happenings. It's just finding how it all ties in with your story. You know.
Well, I mean, the thing is, it's like this story keeps coming back to me, or to the not just to me, but to Andy Collins, Jodie, others that have been involved in this questing, if you like. I mean, the whole story really that's in Strange Fate is about all these things, but we're looking for a relic that the Order of Me and I possess called the Heart of the Rose, which was basically turned out to be a small stone heart made of sort of rose quartz, very roughly, that had been found in this tomb that little Mary had gone into, you know, when they were archaeologically excavating it. So it may have been some old Celtic thing. Another tomb similar, not very far away, in a town called Leek, that they actually, that there is one, they found another one of these stone hearts, but they seem to be completely unique to that part of England by Biddulph Grange. But when we were looking for this stone heart, what happened was that at the end, when the group started to disband after this fire, which is still in this world in 1896, which I can't understand. When things keep changing. I mean, how do you even know half the stuff in the book could be all wrong? But anyway, 1896, when the fire happened, after that, the group started to fall apart. This stone heart was hidden. They left all. There was a memorial service they had to Mary Heath because she had died at the age of 28. But 25 years after she died, in 1897, the year after the fire, they held this memorial service, of which they all kind of like wrote something about her, how wonderful she was. And they write about her abilities and how she found this Heart of the Rose. And the woman who was actually in charge of the group then was Mary Heath's sister-in-law, Laura Heath, which may have been the woman who appears as the ghost in that film footage of in the Egyptian temple. Could be. Laura Heath hid this Heart of the Rose, or got someone to hide it, and then left a series of clues as to where it was. These clues were left in paintings by her very close friend. You may have heard of the pre-Raphaelite painter Evelyn de Morgan. She's not that well known, but if you're into pre-Raphaelite, you might have heard of her. Anyway, she her pictures, she painted a picture. I won't go into all what was in them, but she painted pictures which gave clues to reveal that the Heart of the Rose had been hidden in this cave in the moorlands of North Staffordshire. We went to this cave. This cave, incidentally, is also supposed to be where, you know, the story of Gawain and the Green Knight?
Yeah.
He meets the Green Knight in the end in something called the Green Chapel, which is actually a cave. Well, this is the cave associated with that. Jodie and I went there one time, eventually following these clues, and the final painting showed an angel, or what appears to be an angel, standing in this cave, holding back a curtain, and there's daylight streaming in behind it. This cave was painted by one of the pre-Raphaelites, and it was painted inside this cave, and it shows Gawain kneeling before this angel, which is something that doesn't actually happen in the story. But anyway, that was this painting, and it's definitely of the cave. So we got ourselves positioned in the place where the painting was painted from, and where the angel is revealing there to be another gap leading outside, there isn't that. But what is there is this strange fissure that goes all the way up the wall. Like at some point, the rock has collapsed, and there's all these like veins of rock, sort of different colored rock going up it. It's very weird. It looks like the entrance to a magical portal, just as being depicted in the painting. And when we were there, we thought somewhere this thing must be hidden here. But if it's been placed in one of these in one of these crevices in the rock or something higher up, how are we going to get to it? Suddenly, at this moment we're there, the heavens open and the rain pours down. I have never known such a storm in Britain. There's lightning flashing and all the rest of it. And there's almost like a whirlwind going, a tornado almost.
Yeah, four.
Above us, and at the top of the cave, there's like an opening where where once the roof of the cavern had fallen in, and you could see all the twigs flying around and the lightning going and everything else. The rain is so heavy that within minutes it's pouring down on top of us. And as we stand there, there's this lightning flash, and in a few split seconds, it's caused by a shadow of the trees outside and the stonework, but it looks for all the world as a shadow inside this recess of life-size angel with wings, just like in the picture. And it's only caused by the lightning and the shadows. And then that kind of just, I'm thinking, wow, did I really see that? And then Jamie says, did you see that angel? I thought, oh my God. We both saw it. It wasn't just my imagination. And then the water, the rain had washed down all these crevices at the top, if anything had been in there, and it had washed out this small stone heart made of rose quartz that had literally been washed out by the water at that time.
So what are the odds of that?
I mean, it could be somebody had left it there. People leave these trinkets at old sites, and nothing. Well, the chances of it happening just like that when we went there to find the stone heart, and we find one in that way that reproduces what's in this painting with an angel, and then the storm goes.
Amazing.
But then another weird thing happens after this, or just before that. We went to a pub that was supposedly called the Mermaid. Excuse me. A pub that was supposedly called the Mermaid. When we got there, it's changed its name to the Old Oak, and the people inside said it was never called the Old Oak. Sorry, it was never called the Mermaid. It was always the Old Oak.
Wow.
Oh no, it's bizarre.
So all these things are in strange fates. And what I said before, that it was a different kind of book. I don't know anything else that's like it. Not in the non-fiction departments, anyway.
No, I mean, it's very difficult for people, isn't it, who haven't experienced these things to comprehend it. They just kind of like, what? But I think it's reminding me all very much going back to the ancient mystery schools and connection with that. And I certainly think with the Bridestones and the kind of burial, because there's like a burial area with separate sort of compartments, that's really reminding me of the mystery, the grand mysteries, when people used to go into these places in chambers and coffins and sarcophagi and have that experience. So that's what it's reminding me of very much.
One other thing I was going to ask, how did you know about the swan?
The swan. Well, we had our own experience about the swan. This is the interesting thing, because before I met Gary basically, I think you had several intuitive psychics tell you about the swan.
Yeah,
the connection with the swan. Gary, well, I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah, and then basically my own intuition, it said, my own thought voice, whatever you want to call it, it said you're going to write a book called In Search of the Swan. And I had absolutely no idea what the swan was. I didn't even know I was going to write a book, but then eventually I did. I wrote a book called In Search of the Swan. But Sheila, the one who died in Grenfell Tower, we became close friends, and we would go over to all these Templar sites and everything. We saw Jacques Cousteau's John Cocteau in Leicester Square. We looked at that mural and everything else. So we used to go to all these places. It was fantastic, and including France as well. But one day Sheila phoned me up and she said, Gary, we've got to go to the Philosophical Society in London. And I said, why are we going now? She said, I can't tell you, but we've got to go. So I said, okay, then let's go. So we went there. We walked into the Philosophical Society of Great Britain. And when we walked in the room, it was full of books. There must have been 1,000 books on the shelf. I don't know if you've ever been there or not. And basically, I got a ladder. I went up the steps to the very top shelf, and I pulled out one book. And that was a book by Ledbetter. And I opened it up at the exact page where it was talking about Hamza the Swan. And it said the swan was the third great step of spiritual enlightenment. And so when my book then became the third great step of spiritual enlightenment, In Search of the Swan.
And then basically from that, when Gary, I mean, it's a bit of a convoluted story, so I won't tell it here, but to cut a long story short, when I met Gary for the first time, there was no kind of romance or anything like that. And I had a vision of two swans in a heart shape. And I knew that I was going to get together with Gary and marry him.
Yeah.
And I rang him and I said, Gary, I know that you're going to marry me. And he said, thank goodness for that. He said, because I didn't know how to tell you.
We've never had a single date. But the thing is, I was told I would meet someone where we were. I was told before I met Shona, I was told that we were going to get married. We were going to get engaged in Roslin Chapel. And we got married in a Knights Templar wedding. And we've never had a single
Roslin Chapel.
Yeah. We got engaged in Roslin Chapel. Yeah. It's just the most amazing love story. But we've never had a single date, and we've been married for 20 years, basically. And I'd already bought a ring and booked flight tickets to Roslin Chapel because I knew already, and she didn't know at all.
At that point, no.
No.
And it was only when I saw the vision of the swans in the heart shape, which in fact is actually a really significant symbol, did it kind of twig me? I think, I know we're gonna get together.
But there's something also very interesting is that we went into, before we got married, we went into a cafe in a place called Aden in Norfolk. And basically, there was a card on the thing, and it said Tony Rawlinson, photographer. And I said, you know what, Shona? I said, he's going to be our best man, and we're only 4 weeks away from the wedding. And she said, oh, you're joking? I said, no, he is. And Tony Rawlinson, Sir Tony Rawlinson, he ended up being the best man at our wedding, didn't he?
Yeah, and his great-great-great-grandfather was Sir Henry Rawlinson, who deciphered cuneiform.
Cuneiform, yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
So, anyway,
so
lots to it, but that's basically our connection with the swan. So
yeah,
it's really fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. So meeting you is more than just coincidence.
Yeah. Pardon?
How did you know I had any connection with the swan?
We didn't.
But I do. But you said there's a swan because do you remember I was talking about the greenstone?
Yeah.
The final clues as to where it was hidden was Mary Queen of Scots had done all these embroideries of a swan's neck.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned the ones in Norfolk.
Yeah.
Right.
And because it had Mary Queen of Scots' coat of arms on it and everything else on this sword, we realised that somehow, and she'd supposed to have had the stone, then maybe the swan was important. And cutting a long story short, it was found in a bend in the River Avon in near Worcester in central England. And the bend is called the Swan's Neck. And that's where it was found. And all these various people at the same time were having a dream of a swan and a neck and something around its neck. And that's where we'd find it.
Oh,
so that's when you said about the swan. And I thought, you must have known that. I thought, unless you've read the Greenstone, how would you know it?
No,
you haven't read it.
Yeah.
But it's what you said to me. You go back, when you go back in this film at some point, and you'll see, you're talking to me as if you knew that the swan's neck was associated with Mary Queen of Scots and my discovery of the green stone. Listen to it.
Well, I knew that Mary Queen of Scots had done a tapestry of a swan, because
But you didn't know that I'd had anything to do with swans in finding the green stone.
No, definitely not. No, but there's another interesting thing, Graham.
Listen to what you said, and you're virtually saying it.
Yeah, there's another interesting thing, Graham, about the swan. Is I met a guy called Rex Early, and he was a painter in Bournemouth. He's sadly died now, but he drew a green swan, right? And he said to me, "Do you know what this means?" And I said, "I've no idea." And this was way before I'd even, I had no idea what it meant, and I still don't know. But it was a green swan.
Wow.
Yeah.
Green stone,
and
swan.
I must also add as well that people are going to think that we're potty, but I'll have to tell you anyway that last night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I saw a green man, but not in the way that you would see the foliate heads. This person had a sort of a very long oval shape, and it was sort of in the style of a painting, if that makes sense. But it was beautiful. He had a lovely face, but it was a long oval green man, and I just saw that really strongly, and then I went off to sleep. So that's why I'm wearing green today.
That's supposed to be the Green Knight. The Green Knight who meets Gawain in the cave, the very cave that we went to where all this weird stuff happened and the heart appeared. That's where the cave is, the cave of the Green Knight. And he's a foliate head man, but a nice one rather than the wicked one. At the end, it turns out to be.
That's interesting. How interesting. Blimey.
Yeah.
So we're having synchronicities and weirdness going on.
Well, next week on the show, we've got Ralph Ellis, and he's talking about King Arthur.
Oh, right. Oh, my God. Well, I've written a couple of books about King Arthur, but they're quite tame compared to any of this stuff.
Oh, I know. We're definitely going to have to meet up with you, Graham, or at least get you on the show again, because it's absolutely fascinating stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is quite a weird radio interview. I mean, it's not
very weird,
not a normal one.
Well, the idea of the show is basically we set it all up just to basically bring the truth to people. So, and we obviously realize about synchronicity and magical things that are happening and have happened all the way through life. So it's about bringing all these people out and bringing them all together and hearing their wonderful stories and bringing them to people,
Yeah.
That's marvelous. That's really great. Yeah.
Going back to the gardens again of Biddulph Grange, I thought it's really interesting because obviously I've not been there myself, so I can't sort of say 100%, but I was kind of getting the sense of, because there seem to be tunnels and things linking the gardens, some of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of tunnels. I mean, you go into the Chinese garden, and you've got the big pool I was talking about, and a bridge going over the little stream, and then there's a pagoda building. You go across the pagoda, and then you enter this tunnel into the rocks at the one end of the Chinese shrine sanctuary area, and then you go through this tunnel thing that winds its way through the rocks to come out into almost like another country, because then you're in the Celtic glen, which has got all these like standing stones there, like megalithic stones, the ones they brought from the stone circle, plus this little spring with coming from the rocks, and then a little stream going the way through the glen. You walk through that, then you get to another tunnel that takes you through until you get to close, in the direction of the Egyptian temple. And yeah, that's how it works.
So it's really interesting, isn't it? So it's sort of like you're entering different dimensions, if you like, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, seriously. I mean, these people, they were doing occult stuff. There's no doubt about that. I mean, it's recorded and everything. They were doing occult stuff. Yeah, they've got a Roman tomb type recreation temple thing. They've got an Egyptian one, got Chinese, they've got Celtic. I mean, why? They must have been hedging their bets, doing different types of magic stuff or mysticism from different cultures.
I think also,
well, of course, and also each of these cultures kind of share the same truth, if you like, as well, when you actually research it. You know, and I'm
they all
about...
did. They all had the main thing that they seem to have had in common was, well, they had many things in common, but they all had a kind of trickster of the gods that could control fate, like the ape of Thoth, which is the statue in the Egyptian temple.
Mm-hmm.
In the Chinese garden, they've got the Apis bull, which is another Egyptian thing. What's that doing in a Chinese garden? But it's there.
Well, exactly.
That isn't a god, but kind of represents a thing that can alter fate. And then in the Celtic one, that seems to have been sacred to an ancient Celtic deity, or sort of, well, that's not really, she's known as a Celeste, which basically means a kind of angel type thing, more than a goddess. And she is called Bride, and Bride is who the bride's named the name of.
Yeah. Do you know, it's really funny because I was touching on this earlier. I said to Gary that I was sort of looking at the Mionaya thing that you were talking about, because I hadn't actually heard of that before. So that was a new one to me. And I thought, well, this really, I kept getting Iona, as in the island of Iona in Scotland.
There's another anagram for Mionaya is me Iona. We actually, when we first heard about the Order of Mionaya, we found the sword and was written on it, Mionaya for Mary. Somebody thought me Iona, and we've got to go to Iona, the island.
Right. Well, that's what I got, and I thought, well, okay, I'll do a little bit of looking at Iona, because I honestly don't know anything much about the island of Iona, rather than it was an island in Scotland, and that's all I knew. But what I did discover, obviously, I mean, it's supposed to be the centre of the beginnings of Christianity in Scotland. However, way before that, it was actually called the Island of the Druids, which I thought was really interesting. And it was allegedly it was a primary seat of learning for the Celtic Druid Magi.
Yes, it basically could have been one of the stories behind the Isle of Avalon. I know it's way up in Scotland, but the thing is, yes, that's right, the Isle of Druids. I mean, back in 1979, me and Andy and Andrew Collins and a few others that were involved in the magazine all went up there because we thought somehow there was going to be something happening. And it was really weird because we came onto this island and it didn't really tie up with anything. It's just that all the people, we went into the local pub there. It's where they filmed The Wicker Man, by the way.
Oh, right, okay.
When we went into the pub, everybody sort of turns and looks at you, just like The Wicker Man. And there's people wandering around with weird masks on. It was May Day, which is when he does the things in The Wicker Man. And everyone's looking at us. And basically, there's a guy called Alan who was with us, Alan Beard. And he got so scared that he was going to be burned in a Wicker Man that he spent all night with the sword, with someone propped against the door, holding the sword like this in his bedroom in the hotel, thinking they were going to turn up outside and take him to be burned.
Oh, God.
I don't think they were. I think these people were just, who on earth are these weird characters? But they weren't very friendly. It was very nice.
You're not from round here.
No, I think the problem is a misunderstanding of the word occult. You know, occult simply means hidden, doesn't it? Yeah. And people seem to mix it up with satanic worship and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that's a bit of a problem, isn't it? You know, people just realise it just means hidden.
But anyway, I was just going to go on to say about the Iona thing. Now, there's a thing to do with Bride or Bridget on the island of Iona, which was really interesting because I think Lewis Spence talked about these mysteries and things to do with that. William Sharp also talks about, on his essays of Iona, of a prophecy about Christ shall come again upon Iona. Now, as the bride of Christ, the daughter of God, the divine spirit shall come again as a woman, the shepherdess, the bride.
That's all Rosicrucian stuff, that is.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Is it Spencer Lewis or Lewis Spence? Is it? Lewis he was Spence. He started the Amok, didn't he?
This particular guy's called William Sharp. in his
Right, oh,
essays,
right,
in
okay.
Iona.
Yeah, Louis
Well,
Spencer.
the thing
Yeah,
about the
that's right.
shepherdess is, you know, in the Da Vinci Code, no, it's Da Vinci, in Holy Blood, Holy Grail, they've got that painting by Poussin, which is the shepherdess in Acadia or something.
That's right.
Yeah, it's very interesting because our friend is very much into the Henry Lincoln stuff and all that, and it all ties in. You know, everything ties in.
But it's reminding me. I think basically it's Sophia, and I think it's about the bride and bridegroom, and I think there may be some you'll understand about that, but you know, maybe people that are listening, if you don't, go and do some research on that because it's very enlightening.
Yeah.
Wow. It might come back to the alchemical wedding, but that's another story.
Yeah. Oh God.
But it's interesting, therefore, then you've got the Bridestones, haven't you, going back to Biddulph Grange. So my thinking is, obviously, that was a place of initiation. And that's why, you know, what happened to the little girl, you know, which is the girl based on Alice.
Well, the thing is that it seems that possibly the person buried there might have been the last of the Druidesses of Britain 1,500 years ago, who was the person we explain all this in the book, so I won't go into it all, but who was the person who started the stories or the legends that became known as Morgan Le Fay or Morgana. Who's a kindly enchantress in the original Arthurian story, not the wicked witch she later becomes when sort of, you know, the Christians started rewriting the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it might have actually been. So maybe this last of the Druidesses was buried there. She had some sort of, she could channel the goddess bride or the Celeste bride, this entity. And then this little girl goes in there all these years later, finds this heart somehow that's been kicked down in the mud or something and kind of gets this power. But we've found the heart now, but nothing's happened to me. And Jodie's waiting to see what happens, so we don't know.
Watch this space then.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? You know, there's so many connections, and you know, it's like going in the it's like following the rabbit down the white rabbit, isn't it?
Yeah, and,
I've just realised I'm getting darker and darker here as the light goes.
Come into the light, dear boy.
Well, this is it, from darkness to light.
Yeah, from darkness to light. Yeah. But you know, I mean, the thing is, I think really we could talk for hours on these things because there's so much stuff. It's it's amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible.
Yeah, incredible story.
Sort of getting on to your book and everything, where can people actually buy your book, Graham?
Well, it's called Strange Fate. It's by Graham Phillips. My name.
Yeah.
I can't. You know, I
There it
is. Graham Phillips and Jodie Russell, and it's available on Amazon, on Amazon.com or Amazon.co.uk. So just put in Strange Fate Graham Phillips and you'll find it. We've got a website for it, which is strangefate.net. Jodie's put that together. It's got quite a few pictures and anything new that happens will be there. But you can there's also links there to its Facebook, or you can go on my site, which is grahamphillips.net, which has got links to everything and everywhere.
Yeah, and do have a look at the trailer because it's fabulous. I think that.
That's on Graham Phillips. That's the YouTube. My channel is called Graham Phillips Author.
Well, why don't we play it if we can? Should we play the trailer before the show ends?
Lovely, Laura Lee, if you're there,
could you have
a go
that would be
the trailer for us?
A Victorian family with ancient knowledge. A child with remarkable powers. A 19th century occult society called the Order of Meoniah. A lost relic called the Heart of the Rose. And a race against time. Strange Fate is the true account of the investigation by Jodie Russell and myself that became an incredible adventure a real-life paranormal detective story and encounters with forces beyond bizarre. It is the search for the heart of the rose, an ancient stone said to have the power to influence destiny itself. In central England is the 19th century mansion of Biddulph Grange, once the home of the Meonire Group. In its gardens they created mysterious temples, standing stones, and a sacred spring somehow imprinted with events of the past. They once possessed the relic we sought and left clues to its location in paintings that still survive. Seemingly ordinary people who then vanish without a trace, guide us to secrets hidden for years. Incredibly, history, even reality, inexplicably appears to change. This is an adventure involving time, fate, and the multiverse, leading us to haunted manors, secret chambers, and enigmatic finds. An ancient tomb where worlds collide. A holy well where secrets are revealed. And a haunted mirror that inspired the story of Alice. Under the threat of being lost forever in a world of the impossible, our research leads us ever deeper into the unknown. We must find the heart of the rose before time finally runs out. All in our new book, Strange Fate, out now and available on Amazon.
Wow.
There you go. That's
Incredible.
fabulous.
That's so good.
I'm glad we got that because it's very important. Very important to show that.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Well, can I ask what the stone was that lady was pulling out of the rocks there?
Oh gosh, that's a completely another story. We were going to put that in the book, but basically it's Pandora's box.
Oh, okay.
Once you open that,
something that was thought to be Pandora's box. One of the people that was involved in the story of the Meonire, one of the people who was involved in the Meonire group, as I mentioned before, was Jane Morris, who was the wife of William Morris.
William Morris, yeah.
She was a model for Rossetti, who was also part of all this.
Mm.
One of the paintings he did of her was her as Pandora with the box. Remember I said they found loads of artifacts in this underground crypt that the little girl Mary had taken them to. One of the items that was supposed to be in there was something that had belonged to John Dee, which they believed was Pandora's box. That picture is actually a video of us finding the thing. What happened afterwards is another story. It turned out to be something even weirder than Pandora's box. That is the actual finding of it. We've got the whole thing filmed. That was found more by historical research rather than weird things happening and things falling down from the with the rain or whatever. So that's what that was.
Wow.
But
That's amazing, amazing stuff.
That had been there for well over 100 years.
Gosh. Well, it's incredible. I think as well, from our experience that the way spirit, I call them spirit, the way they work is if you don't get it the first time, they'll do it again and they'll keep telling you and leading you to places until finally you get it. Yeah. But it seems with you, they're sort of plonking it in your lap almost.
Well, it's been going on and off of the different things for years. I mean, over the years, the various books I've written, most of them are very tame compared to this. They don't involve anything mystical or psychic. It's pure historical research.
Yeah.
I've searched for the Holy Grail and I've got one. I've found something that may have inspired some of the original stories of the Grail in the Middle Ages, the Arthurian. I located a staff which I believe may have been the staff of the historical Moses in a museum in Birmingham in central England. Everything's in central England, don't ask me why.
It's funny, our friend is there.
I was going to say, it's funny, our friend Hamilton is round that area
Hamilton
as well.
is there, so we're going to have to get together.
When I was looking for this staff of Moses, I mean, they made a 1-hour documentary all about it. You can see it on my Graham Phillips author YouTube. There's been 500,000 views of that one. I mean, I didn't make the documentary; it was made professionally, for TV and that. But as you'll see, I'm searching for this staff of Moses, which I think might actually exist. The staff with which he's said to have parted the Red Sea and brought down the plagues of Egypt. Called upon God's power, sort of thing. And this staff, I lived in Birmingham. That's where I still live. And I was in Birmingham then. This is in 1999, 2000. I start my research in the Birmingham Library, which is one of the biggest libraries in this part of the country. And I find the writings of some archaeologists who claim to have found something in Petra, which is in Jordan. So I go off there and I'm traveling halfway around the Middle East. Eventually, I find out that they did find this staff. It was brought back to Britain. It was sold to an American collector who had it, but when he was taking it back to America, I thought, wow, it's going to be. He was buying it for a museum in New York. I'm going to be able to find this. What was the ship he decided to go on? The Titanic.
Oh God!
And I think, well, it's at the bottom.
That's just a minor detail, Graham. That's it.
But then what happens is he didn't go down with the ship. When he got the place went from the ship went from Southampton to Ireland. It stopped off in Ireland to pick up some more people, and he decided at the last minute with his family that he was going to go for a drive round Ireland and get the next ship. So he left and he took his cases and everything with him. So he wasn't on the ship when it went down. But eventually, all the way down until I discovered it was then sold to the Birmingham Museum, and it was on display in the Birmingham Museum Egyptian Gallery, right opposite the window, right opposite where I'd first started the research in Birmingham Library. You look at there's the Egyptian Museum. I travelled halfway around the world to come back to where I started to find this thing.
But isn't that like life, though?
Yeah. Well, you're a far more interesting character.
Hence why I got the name of a real life Indiana Jones. I mean, when they did when the last Indiana Jones film came out, the one of the Crystal Skulls, they brought out, I mean, I don't know how many people remember DVDs, but they had a box with the 4 films in it, and they used to have in these boxes for the young people who've never heard of DVDs, they used to have if you had a special box of a compilation box of something, they would normally have an extra disc with other things on it, behind the scenes making the film and so on. And they wanted to find like an hour documentary, and I wanted to find 4 people. This was Lucasfilms wanted to find 4 people who had really searched for magic stones in India, who had searched for the Holy Grail, who had searched for crystal skulls, and had searched for the Ark of the Covenant. And because I'd got something which could be the Grail, they included me in this. So it's George Lucas himself who described me as a real life Indiana Jones.
Wow.
So, yay!
Interesting, yeah. You have the Force.
You have, may the 4th be with you.
Well, I haven't done anything Star Wars-ish yet.
No.
But then in Star Wars, if you actually search deep into it, there's some interesting allegories in that, isn't there?
Yeah. That's the thing. It's the allegory.
Yes, I'm sure there are. I mean, I'm not really. I haven't really watched them to that much. I'm a more Star Trek person.
Okay. Bless you. Well, listen, Graham, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
And I think it's been incredible. I've enjoyed it so much. It's just fascinating. And I think we definitely have to keep in touch.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
And maybe you'll
Thank you
come on
very much.
again.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to. Well, we actually come up to, you know, the Birmingham area anyway to go and visit our friends. So, you know, what? Perhaps whilst we're up that way, we'll come and say hi.
Yeah, definitely meet up. No, that's
That would be
great.
lovely. Yeah, that really would be lovely.
For sure. But I'm wishing, well, we both wish you and Jodie all the best of
All
luck
the very best for the book.
with
Yeah.
the book. Not that you need our luck, because I think it's incredible, and I'm sure it's going to get loads of sales because it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So I'll say thank you so much, Graham. It's been a pleasure talking to you and fascinating. And we'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Graham.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
So thank you for joining us in the audience there, listening to us this evening on the Allens Investigate. You can check us out at www.theallensinvestigate.com and on Facebook and Instagram. We're broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network 105.3 and 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans and also on Roku. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye till next week.
Thanks, Graham.
Bye.
Bye-bye.